So ghosts obviously would mean some part of us, whether that's soul, spirit, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, lives on after we die. You know, some part of us, whether that's consciousness, spirit, our personality, our soul, continues to exist after we die. So typical neuropsychology would say we're like machines. We're a combination of circuits and electricity, and then obviously once the circuits and electricity stop working, the machine stops working, and we cease to exist in any sort of plane, whether that's consciousness or soul or anything like that. The survival hypothesis contradicts that and says some part of us lives after that. So ghosts obviously would mean some part of us, whether that's soul, spirit, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, lives on after we die. That's basically the survival hypothesis.
And I feel like that is it's a huge part of the research and a huge part of what the data that we've collected has showed us. I almost used the word evidence, but the data that we've collected has showed us is that there is some sort of a retention of that. But being a psychologist too, you have to understand that a lot of that could also be that it comes from our own ego and our own just the way that we put ourselves atop the level of importance in this world, and the way that we put ourselves in a position where we think that we deserve to have life after the physical, and that we think that we should have more of a something beyond this. And so part of it, I think, comes from our own almost misguided sense of self as well. But that misguided sense of self could also be what's leading to these ghosts existing. We could just have these consciousness continue because we think that they should. Yeah. I mean, listen, it's sad to think that my memories, my personality, who I am as a person just stops when I pass on. It's sad, and it's depressing in a way. So, if given the choice, you want to say, yes, there is an afterlife. There is something that happens after we cease to exist. And all the data that you collect, these near-death experiences that people have when they die, and they sort of have these out-of-body experiences where they see the surgeon and they float to another room and they say who's above them in the hospital. This kind of gives some idea that what's going on there, like if consciousness is somehow leaving the body, and if consciousness could leave the body, how long is it outside the body? And so all these questions really come back to this idea of what happens after we die, or afterlife, or survival hypothesis. So I think as humans, we want. I know I would like that to think that happens after we die, not only for me but for pets and everything else like that. So maybe that passion is something that's related to actually the afterlife. But I think there is a lot of data. There's a lot of ghostly encounters out there. Mm-hmm.
That there's millions and millions and millions of them, and you could chalk up I don't know how many to fraud, maybe 10% to fraud, and 20% to misinterpreting things, or I can keep going with the percentages, but I think there's a lot of them out there that are pretty good solid evidence that something is happening after we die.
And you do talk a lot in the book about how it's hard to express this to people who have never experienced it, because it's not something that's easily repeatable, that you have to have the experience kind of in the moment to really understand it. And I think that if you look at the people who go into this field, the people who go into doing this research, or the people who are just hobbyists that want to go and buy a ticket to a ghost hunt, whichever path you're taking, you're putting yourself in a position where you can have these experiences on a repeated basis. You are having them on a repeated basis, and you will experience these things because it is out there. But that is a catch-22, because as you put yourself into those experiences where you can actually experience them, then comes the expectation of having that experience. So how do you differentiate as a psychologist between, something that is an actual event and something that was just somebody anticipating an event and maybe overthinking it?
So that's the $1 million question.
How do you validate an experience? When we think about things, we think parapsychology is completely different than psychology. This idea that love and happiness and depression and sadness, these are concrete, real things, but a person's personal encounters with ghosts are not concrete, real things. But the idea is they're kind of the same. They're both subjective experiences that people report. Anytime you read a research article in psychology or counseling, I shouldn't say anytime, a fair majority of the time, it's based on questionnaires. And questionnaires are just subjective perspectives. People fill out a questionnaire. On a scale of 1 to 10, how depressed are you? 10. Then you do the therapy, and then they ask on a scale of 1 to 10, 4 weeks after you do the therapy, how do you feel? And then you circle a 3. Well, his depression went down. So the research and the statistics that they're drawing from those types of research articles is all subjective. It's a subjective experience. There's no test to determine if their depression went down as far as blood tests, urine tests, anything like that. So a lot of the research out there, and this is for psychology, but this can span different areas. Anytime you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with subjective perspectives and experiences, aside from doing neuro testing and things like that. So, I think our subjective experiences, we have to, as a society, we have to believe people sometimes when we do research. And the same with ghostly encounters. You have a person, you can maybe rule out some things. If you have two people witnessing the same thing, you could probably rule out some type of hallucination.
Mm-hmm.
So there's things you can do to rule stuff out, but you can never 100% know that this person had an actual genuine experience. I just think in technology right now, we're not at that point. Maybe in the future, I always say this because people ask me, what's it going to look like in 20, 30 years? Are we still going to be having no answers to all these questions? And I think that things are getting better as far as paranormal experiences and parapsychology and validating some of these experiences. But as technology gets better, I think, Craig, we carry our phones around with us now, and we can determine our blood pressure and all this other stuff. I think maybe in 30 years, we might be having our phones with us 24/7, so when someone actually has a spontaneous paranormal experience, something could happen on the phone. They could record the person's EEG or heart rate or some neuro stuff, and then you could sort of correlate those experiences with that data with true experiences, and then you're going to get more consistency, and the variables are going to get smaller and smaller, and then you could actually have some sort of consistent data to correlate with a paranormal experience.